What's going on, everyone? Thank you very much once again for tuning into another episode of Dr. Homebrew. Now, today typically we don't have homebrew, but we have something much better. We have commercial wine, and I'm very excited about that. Now, today is basically the wine show. What we were thinking about, we've been kind of toying with this idea off and on a little bit about the differences between beer and wine, and for a long time, the marketing around craft beer specifically, but the whole beer market in general, I guess, almost pitted beer against wine. It was kind of like a cultural thing, or like a blue collar versus white collar, I guess.
The snobs versus the Slavs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always thought that was kind of weird. I mean, you kind of get in on it. This is like 90s marketing we're talking about, right? Maybe a little early odds. And then, it sort of became, oh, well, beer can be like wine. It's like, oh, we realize how aggressive that kind of sounded. But I don't really feel that the vocabulary sort of matched that transition from, being steadfast against wine, even though most brewers enjoyed wine, to then accepting the wine, right, into the beer world. So today, I thought I'd bring in my brother-in-law, actually, Jake Neustadt. He works at Bedrock Wine Company in Sonoma, California, everybody. Jake, welcome to my show.
Oh, man.
Welcome to our show. Welcome to my studio.
I like to say blood brother-in-law.
That's right. That's right. Well, I did make you drink a thimble of my blood before coming on the show. That's kind of what you have to do. The two Brians know that.
It's a little inside baseball for Dr. Homebrew.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So getting a little coiny thing out of that blood earlier. Yeah.
I feel like, especially with the tasting, it helps pull anything out.
A little tinny, but a little red wine. I'm not sure you might have been drinking before the show.
Yeah, I did have a Coors banquet. I'm not gonna lie about it. But Jake has been in the wine industry for a long time, and I've known Jake for many years now. And the kid has always had a palate. He's always, it's always been really fun getting together with him on, family, holidays and whatever, and talking beer and wine and flavor profiles and stuff like that. And so I thought Jake would be a good person to get on to talk about the flavors in the wine, but not only just like, oh, I taste pepper or whatever, but kind of where those come from. Now, Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, but your focus really in the wine industry is more on like the agriculture side, right?
Yeah. So I'm a vineyard guy, as we'll say, as whenever I have to go into a tasting situation or a sales situation, I'm just the vineyard guy. But I'm just the guy. Yeah. So I work for a company called Bedrock Wine Company in Sonoma, and I oversee all their vineyard operations. So that means about 200 acres of vineyards that I either directly farm or lease and farm, different situations. But that's over about 14 different vineyards, actually mostly vineyards planted about 100 years ago. So either pre-1900 or early 1900s is kind of our focus. And we put a lot of focus into how we farm grapes. So yeah, I guess, that's a good segue into just Bedrock themselves, because I remember your first job when you came to Bedrock, or one of them, was mapping like vineyards to figuring out what kind of varietals are actually in these super old vineyards that you didn't really know what was what. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about Bedrock a bit, and actually the wines we're tasting I brought because they're good examples of this. But
nice.
What's really interesting about California wine, most people think of California Cabernet or Napa Reds or these things, but the heritage wine of California are these incredibly diverse, they're called field blends of grapes. So we'll refer to some of these as Zinfandel, but actually we go and map variety by variety in these fields, and sometimes it'll only be 60% Zinfandel, 70% Zinfandel. One of these wines, the Bedrock Heritage, actually has 27 different grape varieties in it.
That's crazy, dude.
I want to interrupt you just for a second. So if a bottle is labeled Old Vine Zinfandel, so I assume part of that is there are these like heritage, old vine, 100-year-old Zinfandel grapes. Can you label it Old Vine Zinfandel if it's got X% of other varietals in there because it's old and you don't know what they are?
Well, yes, for sure.
Interesting.
So technically with varietal labeling, the cutoff is 75%.
Mhm.
They're not checking that. Like if a field was picked as Zinfandel, then it's Zinfandel. They don't,
Right.
the TTB doesn't care about that. But
don't ask, don't tell kind of thing.
But we do kind of know what our varietal breakdown is of fields, and follow that. But yeah, back in the day, actually, they used to call it Zinfandels, plural, which just like, so you would just buy Zinfandels, and it's just like, oh, this collection of varieties is Zinfandels.
That's hilarious.
I love that, man. Can you imagine just in the beer world, like you sell a blend of a bunch of beers that you have in the tank? It's like Cooper's sour beer project.
Yeah.
So Cooper has a sour beer project, Jake.
If I could find somebody to buy this stuff too, I can market it as.
Where he has this, I don't even know the
Brian's original, red blend.
Yeah, I don't even know the original culture, but he'll take like leftover beers from like competitions or home brews that he's not going to drink, and he'll just pour them higgledy-piggledy into this.
The original culture is a dump bucket from the first homebrew competition I ever judged.
Right. Oh,
no, actually not.
And I just find that very funny where like, wine, it's sort of, I don't know. Is it, what is the marketing or what is the vibe, I guess, around the single varietal versus like a field blend? Is there a difference? I guess in the beer world, you can sort of maybe make it like a smash where you have one malt and one hop and that's it. We're purists. We don't need anything else.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because the single variety wine is totally a new world invention. So if you look at old world wine in France, for instance, you drink Bordeaux, you drink Burgundy, you drink Rhone.
Mm-hmm.
None of these are varieties. They're wines of place. So the wine is dictated by the place, and then each of those places has rules as to what varieties are allowed to be included. But people aren't focused on what variety they're drinking, and that's kind of where the idea of like terroir comes in, of like you're drinking a place rather than a variety. But that's very confusing, and it takes a level of education, I guess. But so in the new world, it became common to just, we like to know specifically like what we like. So people want to say, oh, I like Cabernet, I like Sauvignon Blanc, this and this, but that's a relatively new addition to the long history of wine. Whereas before it was, people didn't even know.
If I can just pull it to beer, it feels like when craft beer drinkers started to learn names of hops.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
For a while it was like, oh, you go into the brew pub and you see on the wall Tettnang. You're like, I don't know what that means and I don't really care. But now people will come in. Do you have anything made with Simcoe or Sabro?
Right.
Like they're name dropping hops, and you're like, I guarantee you don't know what that is.
Right. And I wonder, is it in the old world of beer brewing, was it just the hops that were regional to that area, or like what was being grown, like how
the styles developed and they were brewed with the hops that were local to that, to them.
So they were just whatever were climatically evolved or climatically bred for that area.
Right.
Yeah. And then eventually, when they scaled up, then they would import and whatever, right? But
dry then.
But now, like New Zealand and Australian hops are really popular here, and there's styles built around them. And you go out to a pub, or I'd like a New Zealand Pils, please, or an American.
Which is weird because it was mainly because of the drought, right? Because we had that big hop crisis for a couple years, so we just pulled in, other world hops, and like, hey, these are pretty good. Turns out that maybe there's crops outside of America that we could actually use. That's crazy. Who knew, man?
Yeah. And going back just briefly to that blending thing.
Yeah.
Back in England, 300-400 years ago, you'd get like the three threads, right? You get like an old beer, a new beer, and some middle beer, because that would help. If there was something wrong with the older one, it would help balance that out. And you would go to the bar, you get like what they call that entire butt or something, and then or porter, and then you'd get it would be a mix, and it'd be whatever mix of whatever was there. So that is an old world. That's a very European old world thing. We're gonna go here. We're gonna drink what they give us.
Everything's slowly souring as you're put some of the fresh in that hasn't soured too much yet, and it'll taste better. Yeah.
So at Bedrock, is that how you guys approach winemaking in general? More old school, old world, or do you have certain things where you have like your own yeast culture, like we would at a brewery?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We think these field blends are really interesting because of that nature, where the two wines we have today are similar age vines, similar kind of field blend, but then from two very distinct locations, and you can really feel the difference just based on location. And when we're making the wine as well, we're just not focused in on what the varietal breakdown is so much. We're just, what is the character of that site and how do we accentuate that in the winemaking? Bedrock, all our fermentations are done with native yeast. So we don't inoculate any red wines at Bedrock.
Really?
Yeah, no.
So just the yeast that's on the grape when you put it in the fermenter.
Right. Yeah. So, and it's actually
crazy.
Morgan Peterson, who founded Bedrock, his father is Joel Peterson, who founded a winery called Ravenswood, which got very large in the 80s and 90s. And so Ravenswood was one of the wineries that kind of made Zinfandel a serious wine. At the time, it was all mostly going to white Zinfandel. But Ravenswood as well, even making at one point almost 500,000 cases and then up to 1 million cases of wine, all native fermentation. Wild.
So
that's cool.
So it would be what, spontaneous, I guess, if you wanted to. Okay. So you're crush the grapes, you don't sulfite them, you just let them go.
We put in about 30 ppm sulfur at crush, and that actually Saccharomyces kind of has a niche under sulfurous conditions are under sulfide. So we'll pitch a little sulfur basically to favor the Saccharomyces, and so that other spoilage organisms can't get a foothold. So the sulfur is important to get a clean native fermentation, because the Saccharomyces doesn't mind it at all.
Okay, they have a tolerance, but everything, all the other bugs and gunk doesn't.
So, and we want some activity from other bacteria and other ambient yeast, but obviously not too much.
Yeah. You're not doing like a open ferment sour beer where you just open the cool ship or whatever and be like, hey, everybody, it's a free party.
Right. But I mean, we're not careful about it though. Like they're open top fermenters. There's kind of an amazing thing with wine because of the low pH, like how acidic it is, and then how alcoholic it gets pretty quickly in the fermentation. Saccharomyces is really the only one that's going to become really dominant as long as there's a little sulfur in there. So it's quite easy to do native fermentations. Obviously people get afraid of it, but if you know how to control it, we do over 100 fermentations every year native.
Wow. So there you go, folks. Fermenting beer is a lot harder and takes more skill, is what Jake is saying.
Right.
Is there any truth to this? The thing that I've heard from time to time, that the yeast from the Budweiser brewery in Fairfield gets out into the fields, and is some of the yeast that you're naturally fermenting with, is the Budweiser from that? Or is that just an old wives' tale?
I have no idea. There's not, I mean, I've not heard that, but it is, I mean, it's the same. It's Saccharomyces. It just, it definitely could be. And there's not a lot of vineyards right there around the factory, but
that'd be wild, dude.
It'd be hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, I love this, man. This is exactly what I was hoping it would be. It's just this weird kind of breakdown about the two industries. So we've all heard that craft beer is on a downturn. What's the wine industry like these days? Are you guys feeling it too? Is it just beer? Because my theory is craft beer is dying because we have too many hazy IPAs. That's what I want it to be.
Yeah, I mean,
but I don't think that's the case.
Actually, the wine industry in California is kind of in free fall right now, like in a really unprecedented way. So it kind of went from normal to really, really bad in 1 year, and it just keeps getting worse. The tariffs are making it worse. So all these things are coinciding, but it's odd because no one can point to one single thing, and the rug got pulled out really fast. So there's
no way to correct it if you don't
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
You drive through Lodi, even around this area in Contra Costa. I mean, there's tens of thousands of acres of vines getting ripped out right now to adjust for a market adjustment. So it's in total disarray right now.
Man. How do you guys plan for that?
Well, we couldn't plan. Nobody saw it coming.
Yeah.
And people point to all these reasons like, oh, it's like hard seltzer, it's this, it's that, but nobody really knows why young people aren't drinking wine. It's too expensive. There's all these things.
It's hazy IPAs. People realize they don't like them. And like, well, that's the only thing that I have, so I'm not going to go there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're, kind of reorienting in the way, we're kind of focusing on using the fruit that we farm ourselves, maybe buying a little bit less. We buy quite a bit of fruit from like special vineyards, other growers, and kind of have, every year we release almost 40 different SKUs.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
So,
and I'm on the list. You know what I mean? I'm buying.
So yeah, everyone we have to take care of the fruit that we grow that maybe we don't have a buyer for this year, and try to utilize all that.
That's crazy, because I think of it as much as for every release I get the email says, hey, here's when you can buy the things, right, when everything's released. And as much as I go through all the lists every year or every quarter whenever they're released, it really connect with me that a winery would make that many varietals. To me, that's a beer thing. Like you have to have a certain number of SKUs on the board to get people of all interest levels to come in and buy the thing. I don't know why. I just feel like, okay, California winery red wine. That's it.
Yeah,
that's all you do. But you guys do, of course, you have like rosés and you do a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, and that's where we think these heritage field blends are like the best showcases of terroir of any grape type in California. So we think, for instance, like we think an old field blend grown in Sonoma versus Lodi versus Amador, those are really interesting and different compared to other varieties, maybe like Cabernet in different places. So that's why we're kind of obsessed with making so many of these different old field blends, is because they show place so well.
It feels like more like a passion project, if I'm on, you know what I mean? Like a passion for the industry itself, rather than I love making X wine. And I know it's a new school versus old school, like you were saying, which makes a lot of sense, but I feel like, I don't know. It's almost like, and again, this is the show, folks, we're going to bring it back to beer, where it's very much like the smash beer method, or, when people started doing, English style ales in America with pins and the whole beer engine and stuff. Like, I love this old school format because it delivers the best of the product that we work with. And you don't do that if you don't love it. And I don't know. That's very interesting connection that I just was forced to be made.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, the whole thing is very much, everyone at Bedrock is just extremely interested in what we're doing. And then also, like, there's a real mission statement of taking over these old vineyard sites so that we can make a really compelling wine, so that we can kind of elevate them, make the economics of that vineyard work better, and actually keep it in the ground. So, Morgan also founded the Historic Vineyard Society, which is a whole nonprofit to kind of raising awareness about these like living California heirlooms that literally predate electricity.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, they were all put in by horses and dynamite, and with that, they predate the internal combustion engine as well. So that's all
damn.
And they're here and they're alive, and many of them are very healthy. Like the one right near your house here yields 3 to 4 tons an acre. It's from the 1890s, and that's like a normal high quality vineyard yield.
The ancients planted these.
Yeah, I mean, they're
the ancient ones.
We grow them without irrigation. They're just dry farm bush vines. So it's kind of amazing that they're here, and yet Zinfandel has an odd reputation in the industry. So it's that's why it's our focus.
Interesting. And you went to school up at Davis, right? UC Davis.
Yep. Yeah, undergrad. UC
That's
Davis.
nice. And because they have obviously a large wine program, but they have a significant beer program there too with Dr. Charlie Bamforth. Didn't you take a class with him?
Yep.
He's a personal hero of basically everybody on the Brewing Network. Had him on several times. Such an amazing guy. But how was that, crossing the stream, so to speak, for the, focusing on viticulture so hard, and then you're like, oh well, now I'm learning about beer. Is that an easy jump to make?
I mean, I didn't know anything about what I was doing when I was an undergrad at UC Davis. I was 20, I decided I wanted to do this at 20 years old, and was, learning the material to pass the courses, but had no real world experience in the it's one of these funny things. Like, I'm learning about an industry that I have no experience with. So in the end, yes, it was just learning a different thing. I don't come from agriculture or come from a wine making family or anything like that. So it was all, at the time, it was all new to me.
Yeah. What got you started in it? I don't know if I've ever asked you that.
I was just at UC Davis in like a liberal arts, journalism, international journalism track. And
I did not know that about you. That is fascinating.
Yeah. Quickly realized that was not the cutting edge of what Davis offered. And the wine program was. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. Took an intro course. It's something that they really put a lot of funding into.
Yeah.
And I also kind of wisely at the time was like, oh, it's also a trade. Like, I have a track after I graduate, and switched in when I was 19. So it was, I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah, that's such an early age to be, an illegal drinker, I'm assuming, and then go, you know what I want to do is learn how to make alcohol that I legally can't taste yet.
Right. And there are certain labs. So you start the track, you can take the viticulture courses, and then they intentionally put the enology courses second so that people are 21.
Okay, yeah.
So that you can actually participate in labs and stuff, which you can't before.
That's smart.
Yeah. But it's also when you're 19, 17, 18, whatever, my daughter's going to graduate from high school in like 3 weeks. And people expect how does a 17-year-old, 18-year-old know what they want to do for the rest of their life and know what to go to school for? I mean, I changed my mind about 10 years afterwards, and I told my daughter, do whatever you want to do, because in 10 years, you're going to want to do something totally different.
I'm 47, and I literally need a career path. Because podcasting is not it. I don't know what to do, and I get stuck at that where it's like I have no idea, because I can learn anything right now. I can sit down, I can take class, I can do it, but I don't know what interests me enough to do that. It's hard. So I imagine at 19, it's a little bit. I don't know if it's easier, but I think there's more pressure when you're 47. You're gonna die.
A little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like
you won't die for a while, John.
I think so too.
Jason.
Yeah.
I was at the right school, got to find, put down a cool path. So
yeah,
absolutely, man. And you've gone a long way. It didn't take you to Australia for a while. New Zealand.
Yeah.
Nice.
See, that's wild, man.
Were you making like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc?
No, I wanted vineyard experience, so I worked on a field crew for a full season down there.
Wow.
The southernmost wine region, New Zealand. So in New Zealand, that's like the Antarctic side. So the south side is the cold side.
Interesting.
And
what kind of grapes do they grow down there?
So it's in the Otago area. So that's right near Queenstown, where a lot of kind of the outdoorsy stuff is. And it's mostly high-end Pinot Noir and Riesling. So
nice.
Quite cold. We would get during harvest, the owner of the vineyard would be like, oh, there's a southerly coming in, which I didn't know what that meant. And that meant winds from Antarctica. So we would be picking grapes.
Oh, God.
And suddenly there'd be just an ice storm.
Jesus Christ.
So just, wildly cold place to be growing grapes.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
I want field experience. So instead of, staying around California, I'm going to go literally down to the bottom of the world.
Yeah.
Which is so cool, dude. I could never do that. Are you kidding me?
I mean, it's tough. I mean, well, now I manage vineyards, so I speak a lot of Spanish, but at the time it's really hard. You can't just go up and find vineyard work in California without speaking Spanish, or it's a whole
right.
So but going to New Zealand, their whole industry runs on backpacker visa, people coming in to travel and work.
That's crazy.
So that's how
I
most
believe
of the
that.
grapes get grown there is like German
It's very
backpackers.
it's very like Humboldt, the gold green triangle shit, where you're
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm passing through. I'm gonna trim weed
Yeah.
farms for a bit, and hopefully I don't get disappeared.
It's very much the cult. People just live in their camper vans and work on vineyards for a couple months and then go continue traveling.
That's
Yeah.
wild, man.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Well, Shar, when we're talking about this, before the show, because we actually plan sometimes for these shows, guys.
Yes.
You were talking about you found the wine judging sheet or something like that, right?
Yeah, I found something from the American Wine Society called the Wine Evaluation Score Sheet and Chart. And it's fascinating for those of us as brewers because it's got 5 categories: appearance, aroma/bouquet, taste/texture, aftertaste, and overall impression.
Yeah,
Does that sound familiar at all?
Yes, it does. It's weird.
And it's a 20-point evaluation scale. I tried to find a sheet that was filled out, but unlike beer, where there's all kinds of feedback that's given, as far as I can tell, this is like your score sheet is going to have 4 or 8 wines per sheet, meaning it's going to be a grid where each line is a wine, and you just put a number in each of those boxes for those categories and tote that up with not any substantive feedback. Even though there's a flavor wheel, there's off flavor descriptors, just like judging commercial beer or homebrew.
Yeah.
But that's just that none of that ever makes it in to the score sheet, as far as I can tell. I guess there would be space if somebody thought it was exceptionally, I don't know, if it was exceptionally, what's that off flavor that you put the saran wrap in to get like the cork, if it's corked.
Right.
The TCA, you might write TCA maybe, but it's not. Yeah, the sheet, we would have one entire 8.5 by 11 sheet that judge one beer, and you got like 8 lines for 8 wines on that same sheet. So like most of that, the mental and the physical process of scoring it goes on, but it just doesn't make it to paper. Is that have you seen the score sheet before, Jake, or is this something I just ran into some weird ass thing that nobody uses?
No, and I mean I have very little exposure to wine judging. The only thing I have some exposure to is kind of the Master of Wine program and how they evaluate wines, and that's more classifying and identification of wines, and kind of that flow chart. But I don't have really any experience with wine judging, and in fact, like I know the predominant wine critics. Obviously Parker's a famous one, but Galoni, Antonio Galoni is kind of a current major one. They're certainly not. They're going off of their just innate talent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And do you enter wines into competition from your winery at all ever, or you don't? Why? And I guess people would do that because you want to try to win and get some marketing juice out of that, and be able to put out some press releases or something.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I think there's different generations of winemakers kind of do that differently. We'll join county fairs or whatever, and I think for certain you're just trying to reach certain marketing niches. Certainly if you're going for like more of a local drinker, but the only thing we'll do is we'll submit wines for more like publication scoring, and we try to not. There was a whole period of wine in the 90s and early 2000s that was very much based off of scores. So like scores from critics, and that's what you would see on the shelf. People would get Wine Spectator magazine and like go through kind of scores. And
like in the late 90s, I'd go to Whole Foods or something, and I just look down they would have the label, or you go to the good wine store. This is a Wine Spectator 92. This is a Wine Spectator 25 or 95. You wouldn't put a 25 out. And there is like that idea that there's a compression of scores where, like in homebrew at least, you get the courtesy like 17 out of 50. But in wine, it's pretty much like, I mean, it seems like, as I recall, 70 or 80. If you're that's about your courtesy. This wine isn't good, don't buy it. Score
pretty much sucks.
Oh man, I mean, no. I even think an 80, certainly you wouldn't advertise anything below a 90.
No.
An 87 would be just like try to have nobody know about that. Like you shouldn't have submitted that one.
Yeah.
It's drinkable.
Yeah.
It's
so it's really funny, and then how it all kind of coalesces like that. And it's amazing. The current kind of younger generation of winemakers has really tried to get away from scores, because it really like pushed styles to all become very similar to kind of meet certain critics' palates, because they wielded so much power. So people have really tried to get away from scores and more focus on, like direct education to consumers, or like getting people just more appreciation for people's own opinion. But it is amazing, like scores very much still move wine. So when a big score does come, it's like it still moves quite a bit of wine.
See, I want to say that's what happened in beer too, where like, Beer Advocate or whatever came out and everyone started scoring beers. I feel like the sort of the output shifted towards what the algorithm in like Beer Advocate would say people wanted to drink. The higher rated beers have higher amounts of this or that. And everything kind of adjusted based on these scores. And then I think people realize, well, that's not sustainable. These beers are very expensive now. And also not everybody's drinking them. Just because it says it's popular on the internet doesn't mean that my local customers are going to be drinking it. And so I think that backed off a little bit too. But it's interesting how scoring stuff and categorizing shit, which is kind of what we do innately as human beings, can just ruin ruin stuff. Man.
The Brewing Network did that too. We talked about all these great beers, the Pliny the Elders and the Youngers and the whatever. Sure, but I think a difference is in wine, like you were saying, Jake, there's a handful of very highly respected newsletter writers, and people will spend $1,500, $1,000 a year for those newsletters, and they'll buy cases sight unseen for investment or for drinking later on, based on the word of those people. And we don't have that in beer, right? The whole investment part of it is an aspect of wine that doesn't get in the way of beer, because there's very few beers you can age, and even those, it's very rare you're going to ever make much. You're not going to make money off it. You're going to get a bottle because and age it because you want to see what it tastes like in 5 years. You're not going to. The market for aged beer is extremely, extremely limited. Unlike wine, where people will buy. My daughter's high school is next to a place called Wine Bank, which is like a self-storage that's refrigerated for wine. So people get like, I'm sure there's people that have hundreds or not thousands of cases they never intend to drink. They just are sitting on it to sell it at a later time, which it fucks up the market in a way that the beer market doesn't get fucked up.
Well, you had the beer flippers for a while. They were pretty popular, where they would just stand in line for all the whales or whatever the stupid name they called themselves, where they would just buy a bunch of, the latest barley wine from Surly, and they don't want to drink it. I mean, they'll have one or two, but they'll buy 5 and then they'll sell the rest. And it's like, oh, okay, that's weird. And I think that kind of helped, drive everything too. But I don't know. What do I know? But I do know, actually, that we're going to take a break and we're going to come right back, and we're going to start drinking some of this wine. And I really want to talk about some of the vocabulary we can pull out of this and maybe how we can match it to beer, because hopefully at the end of this maybe entices people to want to go out and try a different bottle of wine and, sort of stretch your palate a little bit. So if we can combine the vocab a little bit, make it easier to enter, a brand new stage of drinking in their later years, then we're going to do it for you. So hang on, everyone. It's Dr. Homebrew. We'll be right back. All right. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. We are back here with Jake from Bedrock Wine Co., and we are going to be drinking some wine. Jake, what wines do we have here? There's they're liquid, they're wet, and that's about all I know about them.
So these are two different, we call them heritage blends. So it goes back to, so neither of these are labeled Zinfandel. There's a reputation of Old Vine Zinfandel in California, of being kind of this high alcohol, boozy, type of wine.
Very oak heavy.
Yeah, just like people, or kind of sweet, and thick, or so. Certainly, so the winery is founded in 2007, and it was probably kind of Zinfandel was at the peak of that reputation at that time. So, the idea was to showcase the historical nature of these vineyards and also the fact that they are field blends. So anyway, so these are two different field blends here. The first one is Evangelo Vineyard, which is actually just about 10 minutes from where we're recording right now.
Hell yeah.
In Contra Costa County. So planted in the 1890s, on basically out here, there's a whole area that if you look at old California maps was called the Sandy Lands. And it's these incredible
I'm telling you, it's Middle Earth. I swear to God, the ancients lived in the sandy land. Everybody.
So basically, this is the Carquinez Strait that extends from the bay out to the Sacramento Delta, and it's every day as the Central Valley heats up, it pulls in cold air from the bay. And creates this Venturi effect, which is why it's so incredibly windy out here.
Yes, it is. Everyone's heard me for years complain about that. Yeah.
So basically, what characterizes this vineyard is sand and wind, and it has kind of this coastal environment, so it can be pretty warm, but then also really mild overnight. So there's not a huge diurnal shift at night, which people talk about in the context of wine. And then so the vines themselves are from the 1890s. It's a mix of Zinfandel, Carignan, and Mourvedre primarily. So 3 different varieties. There's a total of like 12 out there, but 3 predominant. And then they're own rooted, which is unique to vineyards. Most vineyards are actually grafted onto rootstock because of a pest called phylloxera, which devastated the whole global wine industry multiple times. So in the 1870s, 1880s, they developed rootstocks. So basically 99% of grapes in the world now are grafted onto a rootstock, which has American vine DNA in it. So that resists the phylloxera anyway. So it's unique to have a vineyard that's own rooted, and it's on sand, and it's dry farmed, and we only get about 10 inches of rain out here. So it's kind of a remarkable vineyard. Should I talk about the second wine too? In
yeah,
contrast,
we can do that. Sure. Yeah.
So in contrast, the second wine is from Sonoma Valley. So this is our the Bedrock Heritage wine. So our home ranch in Sonoma Valley. So also this is 1888, grafted onto rootstock in this case. So mostly St. George rootstock. And then the soils, everything is dramatically different. So average 30 inches of rain a year. It's on rocky red volcanic soils in Sonoma Valley. Massive diurnal shift. We'll have during harvest, it'll be 90 degrees during the day and 40 degrees at night. Let's see, just overall, you almost couldn't have 2 more different sites in California, which is actually why I wanted to choose these 2 to show
nice
similar grapes, similar winemaking, but just 2 different sites.
Yeah, different output. The result is
different
crazy.
Outcome, yeah.
So like the Evangelo there's a little lighter color. I mean, we can kind of sort of I would think attack this like a beer, maybe. You know what I mean? You go through the appearance, swirl it around. There's like this nice, lovely little purple highlights. And
reddish purple, yeah.
Reddish purple, yeah. And it's light. It's almost like a grape juice, I guess, if you want. But if you go to the home blend, that is dark,
rich purple. Yeah.
That is like purple ink, and it is they look surprisingly different, and it's same basic methods. I would imagine, right? You're treating everything kind of the same. It doesn't really matter. I mean, there's probably slight tweaks and adjustments in fermentation, but for the most part, it's
so there are some winemakers out there that really they take a mindset of let's do everything exactly the same so that all we're showing is the site difference. We take the mindset of making the wine to the site. So basically what that translates to is Evangelo Vineyard. So the sandy site has a really fine grain tannin. And everything about it has like this fineness. So we age the wine in large format barrels, very little, if any, new oak at all, because we find that any new oak and then small barrels for élevage really overwhelm that tannin, and the wine becomes oaky extremely fast. Whereas the Sonoma wines have a lot more just phenolic density to them, and they can just suck up oak, and actually the oak complements the wine while not being overt. So
phenolic density.
Right. Oh, we're getting into wine terms now,
dude.
baby.
What a good turn of phrase, man. Phenolic density. Fuck, I love that. Sorry, go ahead.
So not made exactly the same, but we feel like we can accentuate the qualities of the site actually and enhance them with the way, particularly with élevage. It's not so much, the ferments are basically exactly the same. We native ferment to dryness on the skins, press off the skins, and then they go into barrel. And it's just how much new oak, and then the size of the oak is very important.
Okay. Man, that's fascinating. I wonder if, like you were talking a little bit, Shar, about the wine score sheet and how there's not really a lot of feedback. I wonder if it's because by the time you're drinking, it's like 2 years old. I mean, this is what 2023 vintage of the.
That's got to be exactly right. I didn't even think about that. Right? And you're right, because wine is made in the vineyard and beer is made in the brewery with generally standardized ingredients, which are still agricultural ingredients, but you generally know what you're getting if you're getting a certain type of malt or hop and making a beer. Wine's all in the vineyard. And like Jake, you were talking about just the different terroir, the two different places where the grapes are grown. And that's going to make far more difference to how it tastes than anything you do to it.
Yeah. Right. We're not even adding yeast. So really the only levers we have to pull are fermentation temperature, pressing, the amount of pressure when we press, which we don't really mess with very much.
Right.
And then élevage, how we treat the wine during aging.
Do you ever get like a stuck
blend of new versus old oak too?
Right.
Yeah. The oak for sure. Do you ever get like a stuck ferment or a stalled ferment, and how do you address that?
Yeah, very rarely. But yeah, we have a protocol to adjust that, which would basically involve, it depends on how far the wine, normally it's that kind of last 4 bricks where it kind of stalls out, and we'll use a mix of nutrients and basically really burly commercial yeast to get those dry. So yeah, it's kind of a rescue protocol, but normally, like I said, we do over 100 ferments a year, and it's normally just 1 to 2% that actually would stick. And it's normally because of the nutrients in the actual grapes themselves coming into the vineyard. There's just not the right nutrition for the yeast and then it can also become problematic in really hot years if the grapes come in too ripe, too sugary.
Yeah.
Zinfandel is very tricky because it tends to raisin in the field. So it'll be fine. And then you'll get one hot day and you can get a bricks change of 4. So it can go from 22 to 26 in 24 hours.
Yeah.
So that picking decision is kind of everything. And Zinfandel is tricky. So you'll have these raisins in the fermenter. It'll say it's 24, and then alcohol starts to be generated with fermentation and starts to extract those raisins. We call it the Zinfandel treadmill. So you have a potential alcohol, but you just keep extracting sugar, and you start with a wine that should have ended up at 14, and then it wants to go to 18, and that's when you get a stuck ferment. So it's watching.
Interesting. So the alcohol is pulling the sugars out of the raisins that normally wouldn't be extracted from just fermentation or maceration or whatever.
We'll get an initial bricks when it hits the tank, and then the next day, often it'll be a brick and a half higher just for the raisins soaking. So Zinfandel, people love to talk about like, Pinot is like really hard. We like to think Zinfandel is one of the hardest grapes to make for that. The picking decision is quite challenging. So when we're actually sampling the grapes in the field, which we do like every couple days during harvest, we crush them all up, take a sugar, but then we do it the next morning too, to see what does that soak up.
Yeah.
Sure. What the change was.
So then that's our real number. Cause if it's at 24, it's probably actually 25 or 25.5.
That makes sense. Cause you hear all those old stories of ancient peoples, trying to increase the alcohol in their wine, their homemade wine, by soaking raisins in there.
Yeah.
I never
yeah.
really understood how that. I just assumed it was like, oh, because the wine absorbs the sugars and pulls them out. But it is, but it's the alcohol pulling them out like that. Yeah.
So it can just keep pulling them out. And I think that's also part of why Zinfandel became can be a very high alcohol variety, because people want to pick when they normally pick other varieties, but that doesn't bake in this extra two bricks soak. So there's a skill to it, because our goal at Bedrock is to make kind of like moderate, balanced, aromatic, expressive wines that aren't really oaky or alcoholic. So it's kind of like, but it's with Zinfandel. So it's how do you tame that beast and kind of learn how to finesse it? Because we think it can make a very like fresh, expressive wine if you can control that sugar.
I love it.
I want to talk about the wines.
Yes,
so,
yes, I know. Thank you, Cooper, for dragging me back across, because I like interviewing. So yeah, Brian, well, why don't you go ahead and let's do some aromatics, huh?
Okay, so and I just had to look at the back of the labels, and I had a definite guess as to which one was stronger. And that well, did you guys look? Which one of these do you think is stronger?
I didn't look. I might guess the Evangelo.
Okay.
If I had to guess.
JP?
I would guess the Sonoma Valley blend.
That was my guess too, and I just felt like it was a little strong, but they're actually both the same. So
okay.
it doesn't matter. 14.5.
This guy got us. Bold, trick questions with Brian.
I really like the nose on the Evangelo. It's just it's fruity and peppery at the same time. It's got some phenolics in the nose with the fruit, and it doesn't smell jammy at all. It just smells rich and kind of earthy to me. In the flavor, I get a fair amount of tannin balancing the fruit. It's nice and dry. It's really well attenuated. I feel like a dummy when I go into a winery and try to judge the wine with the people that really know their shit. I'm probably, if a wine snob listens to this show, they're like, this guy doesn't know his ass from hole in the ground.
Well, I'll tell you, just do what I do and already accept that you are a dummy.
Yeah.
And then do your dummy thing. And you'll be fine.
Yeah. And the Sonoma, I'm tasting it, and the nose is, it's a little smoother to me. It's a little more kind of muted. It doesn't have that reach out and grab your nose, the kind of pepperiness that the other one has. But it's quite a pleasant, fruity jam. Not really jammy, but like plum and dark currant kind of nose.
Yeah, it's that currant like pepper, like currant like cracked pepper versus maybe the fruit from the Evangelo.
And I feel like it's also very dry and kind of a little what I call leathery. It's got like old bookends. Like it's just like tastes old. It does taste old, and it is old.
Yeah,
the vines and stuff. So it's like
please
more more fruit forward and less tannic to me. And I noticed the alcohol a little bit more, maybe because of that. So it's
you think still less tannin.
It's not. I think less. But
because these have been out. We opened these and poured them at the beginning of the show. It was about 45 minutes ago or whatever it was. And about 20 minutes in, I tasted both, and the home ranch blend, the Sonoma blend, had more tannin. It was a much more bolder wine, but as it's kind of been sitting, it's opened up a little bit. It's not as like what do we say, tight, I guess, which isn't. I don't think you have an equivalent in the beer. We don't have an equivalent in the beer language for that. So
I have to remind myself to swirl too. Like, you gotta do
maybe
that.
just like less like a beer that's over carbonated. So you let it sit and you swirl it for a bit till it like mellows out, like with a barley wine, maybe like an old ale. That's the only thing I can think.
They both do have a lot of tannins, but like I think Jake was saying that there's more tannin from oak in the second one that blends and complements it with the Sonoma Valley, the Bedrock Vineyard heritage one.
The Evangelo.
So the Evangelo has less new oak, you said, and the other one has more, I think. So it's interesting because I don't notice they're actually both fairly. They do have a substantial amount of tannins to them. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what Brian has to say about them too. What do you think of the? what would you pick out in both of these?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just in the aroma, the Bedrock, I think. I mean, they're both really great. Very full aroma. The Evangelo has, just like you were saying, I was kind of nodding and I think saying making a couple of sounds. You said leathery, so I definitely got like the leathery. What I think of as a leathery aroma. That's
Yeah.
When I first learned about, as a brief aside, we always, at least in beer world, you don't want to tell people what they're perceiving. They're perceiving what they perceive, but there's a vocabulary for that, and it takes a little time to learn the vocabulary. And I remember I had my ex-wife and I had a wine tasting class in Redondo Beach, like way back in the day in the 90s.
And it was the most LA thing to do.
It really is.
Yeah.
It was super useful because it was like through the adult school, and I went like for 6 weeks, and every week you'd have like, the guy would pour like 8 different wines, just a little bit for everybody. And you talk about what you tasted, and he would give you some of that vocabulary, because, leather, you wouldn't think necessarily leathery unless someone had taught you that's what that descriptor means.
Right.
But
well,
yeah,
it's funny because I'm looking at this list of vocab from the sommelierchoiceawards.com, and whatever it is. But under L, there's nothing up for leathery.
No.
So
we just made that up today.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's something that we talk about in, at least when I do, and when Wine and Jake and I talked about it too. But Jake, is leathery kind of like a descriptor that you guys talk? Okay.
And it comes, I mean, you'll talk about what type of leather too. We're talking about Spanish leather. We're talking about kind of like old.
Like serious?
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, I love
getting more old.
Sometimes there's like a fine, fresh leather smell, and sometimes it's like an old dry leather. You can really get, but I mean, it comes up a lot in wine, especially old world wines. I feel like you'll get that.
Kind of medium aged book leather to me.
Right. Yeah. There you go. That's right there.
Well, it's funny because I might be conflating things, but either I made a joke or Nicole Ernie said something serious. Either way, it was a long time ago, and it was about the term crackery. And then one of us, maybe let's pretend it was me, because I'm going to make it was funny. I'm like, well, what kind of cracker? Right. Is it like a thin cracker? Is it a thick cracker? Is it a Ritz cracker? Like what kind? And I was just kind of being an asshole. But I guess like if you really want to analyze something, then it makes sense to be like, well, what kind are you talking about? You can't just say crayon. Well, what color, idiot?
Yeah.
Is it round? Is it triangle? Like what? Like, let's go. So you know what? Thinking about it now, I think it was Nicole Ernie, maybe because it wasn't as funny as I thought it was in my head. So it was Nicole. Nicole was saying it in earnest.
And yeah, I mean, we always, when I'm training beer judges, like, okay, it's hoppy? Okay. What kind of hoppy and how much? And what do you get out of that hop, and what's the underlying tone, and what's the below that? Just go as deep as you can.
I just don't know that. I mean, I have I guess a depth of knowledge to talk about bready, but leathery, I don't think I could do it, Jake. I don't think I can go deep into leathery.
You can't pull your like Chrome XL. What tannery?
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, Shar, go ahead.
Yeah.
Or
Go
Cooper,
ahead,
whoever, whatever you guys want to talk about.
Brian was still talking about the two.
We're doing loose and fast and loose.
Yeah,
as much as I wanted to have an outline, we're
having a good time.
Goes, yeah, man, it goes where it goes.
I find that of the two, I like the way that Evangelo expresses itself, because it's just a little more interesting to me. It's got a deepness of alcohol. It's got a depth of fruit there, and that either the tannins or phenolics, which are kind of maybe similar things. They're really expressive in that one, and I think I liked you said powdery or like fine tannins, and I get that. I think I understand what you're saying about it. And the other one, it's also got a deep roundness of fruit, but there's something in the middle that to me is just missing. It doesn't make it watery per se, but there's something in the middle that just like the equalizer falls out in this one place.
And it's so interesting to hear you guys talk about that. There's a couple things to mention. So I intentionally chose the same vintage, which is another thing. I didn't even mention that when we opened them, but that's a very important thing in wine. So they're both 2023s. So a fairly recent vintage, and it was actually an exceptionally great vintage, but a very cool one, actually one of the coolest in the last 100 years, which is very interesting.
Wow.
And what you're saying tracks exactly with what we see, because generally Evangelo is going to be a much more aromatically expressive wine in its youth. And that comes down to phenolic density again. So Sonoma has just a lot more anthocyanin or color phenolics and tannin phenolics. So when you get that, you generally have a wine that's a lot more closed in its youth, because actually like the matrix effect of the wine is suppressing the aromatics of it. So the Bedrock wine in a cool year, this would really not be when you would want to open this wine. This would be a wine that you would actually want to age to let those dense phenolics age out. Some of them will precipitate, some of them will just change, and you'll get a totally different mouth feel. The tannins will kind of mellow out and the aromatics will be released. So that's exactly what we see with these bigger wines. Are generally more closed in their youth, which you can, and they take a longer time to unfurl. Whereas Evangelo ages really great, but it's much more aromatic off the bat, because it's, if you analyze the phenolics in it, there's just less in the Evangelo and there's more in the Sonoma, and that's just purely because of the terroir expression.
Yeah, the Sonoma is clearly much more tannic and much more close.
And the other big difference about these sites is their pH. So Evangelo every year is a very low pH site, so a very high acid site. Bedrock is a pretty low acid site. And I think, Brian, what you were talking about, kind of the center of it, I think the Bedrock, especially when it's kind of closed, it lacks that like brightness in the middle of the palate that the Evangelo always has, that line of acidity. And the Bedrock kind of ages into that, but when it's so dense, it could come off as almost like flat and heavy, not from an alcohol standpoint, but just like kind of this velvety blob in its use.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that. Yeah, it is. I think it is the acidity. I think at first I said that the they both are, have a fair amount of tannins, but the acidity of the Evangelo, it does make it just pop a little bit more, and it's better a fresh, like present drinker. And I could see where the Bedrock has potential for a lot more aging there for sure.
Right.
That's cool.
Yeah, I love the aroma of the Evangelo, because it what I like, and what I really started to explore more, Jake, when you started coming around, is these lighter sort of Italian French table wines, I guess, for lack of a better term, because they're lighter, they're more approachable. You don't have to worry about what you're eating with them or whatever. They're just a nice light kind of drinking wine. And especially coming from, California. I mean, we both come from California, but you know what I mean? Like my wine experiences were, well, like Ravenswood for like really expensive wines or whatever. Very heavy, very oak punch you in the face. And my friend Mike and I, we would go wine tasting, and we'd go pick up all his deliveries, and we'd just drink a bunch of shit where Duckhorn or whatever. And it was like these Zinfandels were just in your face, hot jam and tannin, and I'm like, okay, this is wine. I guess I like it because I was in a bar at the time, so yeah, it's like a thing, right? But I like the kind of lighter side. As you get more into flavors, it's more like drinking lagers, I would guess, maybe, because you there's more of an expression there rather than just like in your face one or two things. You can sit there and like figure out, when you get like a really beautiful German Pilsner and it's sort of perfumey, you get that kind of level, you're like, oh man, that is awesome that I get to experience this. That's the way I feel about with a wine like this, with a lighter profile wine.
Another thing I noticed is the legs on the Evangelo are much more pronounced, and it just tracks down, and
they really are.
The Bedrock.
I was not observant about that. You're totally right.
Just smears down, and it's thick, and you can see that it's viscous, but it just kind of smears down. The legs don't really form the same way. And I don't know. Can you talk about the legs in wine and what difference do they really make for any purpose? I mean, how it coats your tongue or something, maybe, I don't know.
I should know. I actually don't know much about that. Yeah, it's not something we talk about internally.
Legs.
Really, I think people used to think it had to do with alcohol, but I know that's not true. It's part of it, but it's not the full story.
That's what I heard. I think it was Bamforth, that Bamforth show. We talked about legs, or maybe it was maybe one of the wine making shows we did on the session. But yeah, legs are just like, basically anything it's just showing you there's alcohol in there, but it doesn't really necessarily mean anything. It just looks cool. I don't know. That's what I thought too.
You mean though? Yeah, the Bedrock almost has dirtier kind of like, it's
just kind of,
it's very interesting.
It's got legs, but it just kind of smears down. It kind of forms in globs there, and then the other one, they're thinner streaks.
Very pronounced. Yeah,
it's heavier. Shit. Maybe we just proved someone else, not me, wrong.
And it's the same amount of alcohol, so it's something else. I mean, the sugars or something else that maybe
sugar tannins, maybe body.
Yeah, I mean the matrix. Yeah, the whole right.
Yeah,
complicated. Liquid.
It's an interesting way to think about it, the internal matrix of the wine loosening, and instead of just saying, oh, it just ages, it just relaxes.
That is a great mental framework for thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think that you can carry that with beer too, especially with beers that you're aging, because you're building this internal framework in a barley wine or an old ale or something like that you want to unravel in a specific way.
Well, because I mean, literally, a lot of the aromatics are bound to phenolics and bound to sugars and alcohol, and all these things have different bonds and relationships, and those are what's changing as it ages. And that's why the wines change so much. But it's all this, it's very difficult to predict, though you can normally say that a wine with kind of more phenolics, I mean, phenolics are antioxidants, so a wine with more phenolics to begin with is going to be able to take oxygen for longer, and then generally you want a line of acidity there to kind of hold it all together. But so there are some generalizations to make of, this wine should age, but not every really tannic wine is going to get better with age. Some get worse because wines tend to dry out as they age in their perception. So if you have tannin and the wine gets drier, that can make the wine even more austere. So it's about having color and density and center as well, because you want to start with a lot of center in the wine, which the center really comes more from like glycerol and alcohol as well, but the things that kind of give that sweetness center on the middle of your palate.
Well, according to the Sommelier Choice Awards, there is no center, so I don't know what you're saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Please, can you stick to the given outline, please?
I wanted to talk about something a little bit, and that is, I came before. Well, beer to me was a much simpler thing. In college, it was just, Miller Genuine Draft is the good beer, and if it's you're scrounging for quarters in the couch, then you drink Old Mill or whatever. I've come from the Midwest, but
I'm just going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you because the way that you said, Miller Genuine Draft is the best, is the most convincing you've ever been on this show.
Yeah. And then I learned, I studied in Austria and traveled through Europe and learned about good beer there. And then after I went to college, the craft beer revolution was happening, and I moved to the Pacific Northwest and, tasted my first IPA and, stouts and porters and everything else. And it was like, okay, wow, that's a big world. So this is a really long conversation, but that's like, to me, beer was, something cool and kind of unique, but wine was something sophisticated and older people tended to drink wine. I enjoyed.
It helps that I'm older now.
I moved down to California. I enjoyed going to wineries and tasting wine and learning more about them. But I never really felt like I had a great knowledge of them. And then I started getting into beer judging. And when I was learning about beer judging, one of my mentors told me that it's just like, well, beer is a much more has many more flavor components compared to wine in it. Because wine it's one basic ingredient, and the yeast does its job, and you're left with fermented grape beverage. And
Yeah.
you know, beer, it's hops and the barley and all these different, you know, yeasts they can use and whatever. And the hops have, you know, a lot of different, you know, expressive qualities. I don't know. There's probably a lot of BS from either side saying one is more complex than the other, but I don't know, you know, if it's, I mean, in wine, it's when I learned to judge meads and ciders, it was coming maybe more to, and I just got I took my cider judging exam recently, coming around to judging things that are more like wine, where you're tasting the balance of acidity to tannins and the structure and complexity of the things that are there in the fruit and the honey and other, you know, a lot of meads have fruits and spices in them too. So, you know, getting at that, this is a rambling little diatribe here, but it's just like,
it's the wine talk.
Mhm.
It's fine.
interesting
I mean, it's interesting. The complexity in wine, it reminds me of, I think, I'm getting out of my element talking about like European sour beers, or like when the romance of like, oh, this barn and the ambient yeast and creating this very special beer of place. The complexity in wine can be very ethereal if you're really into it, I guess, of like, this is so different and unique, but it is just grapes and yeast. But yet this site tastes like only this site year after year after year. Evangelo's both of these are, but Evangelo is one of the most distinctive sites, like, that we feel like we could pick out from anywhere, even to other sites in Antioch, because it has a certain wind exposure. It has these certain things about it. And it's just, you can have a vineyard, you know, just a mile away from each other, and yet they're so different year after year after year and distinctive. And there's like, I think people get so obsessed with why are they so different?
Yeah. Like I kind of want to, so you think you could pick these, you could pick the Evangelo out from other wines from the region. Not that you think like I'm accusing you of not being, like, I'm not challenging you, but like, is that something that we
know from when we try all our different, we make multiple vineyards out here.
Yeah.
And then other producers make it. Now, actually, every producer that makes Evangelo, there's a thumbprint, no matter how differently they're making the wine, that it's like, oh, you can, Evangelo's in there. Where it's like, we have kind of an internal blueprint for what Contra Costa Zinfandel tastes like, but then below that, what Evangelo tastes like.
Okay.
So it's like, there's kind of the broader region and then certain special single vineyards. And that's why, like, there's literally a tradition of thousands of years in France of like, monks were classifying these vineyards of like, this is the region, but like this vineyard is this vineyard alone. And that's why that whole culture of like single vineyards came. And it's obviously a very real thing in human history to identify certain parcels that for whatever reason create this wine year after year. And people, I mean, that's what people get obsessed about.
It's funny. I was listening to this podcast about, I think it's called Fall of Civilizations, where it's just this British dude researching why civilizations fail. And he was talking about like the Vikings in Greenland and shit like that, and how they came over from wherever, I don't know,
Denmark or
some shit,
Ireland or wherever.
But he was talking about how they worked the earth because it was so hard to grow crops and the amount of work that they put in. And it was the same with the Aztecs he was talking about too, where like it's not really the best growing region for product, but year after year things would change. The climate change at the time was affecting it too, and the quality of crops would drop. But some farms had more luck than others, and farmers would actually fight over the good plot of land to then grow crops for everybody, but then that would slowly dwindle. And it's just like, it's a really interesting concept about for a podcast, like why these things fail. It's not just because, they got invaded or sickness. There's such a multifaceted viewpoint, but that is interesting where the land can just produce in the same region, in the same area, different quality product. And I don't know that you really necessarily see that carry over in beer. because we know what happens. We all, do a sniff test for hops, or, we eat the grain and we look at the fan levels on the sheet and we go, okay, well, that's what it is. But, once you go through the whole process of making the beer, I wonder how much that matters in the end. I don't know. Can you tell a Midwest barley versus a, Oregon barley? I don't know. In the flavor.
These are all good questions. We're not going to answer them today.
No, we're not going to answer them today. But I guess the other side of that is it doesn't matter, because the sum of the parts don't necessarily need to be. Sometimes they're better than the individual parts, and sometimes they're not. I don't know. It depends on what you want to get out of it. But let's take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to wrap it up here, I think, a little bit. Maybe do some more vocab, some more tasting, and then we're going to split. So hang on, everyone. It's Dr. Homebrew. We'll be right back. All right. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. We are back here. And for our final segment, I think what we're going to do, and this is my idea, nobody else had this idea first. This is totally my idea, is Jake, do me a favor. Do you think maybe you could talk a little bit about how to buy wine? Again, it's my idea totally. No, Jake was like, hey, you know what we should do? You should tell people how to buy wine. I'm like, yes, exactly. Because what I do, this is what I do. You guys can do the Jason method if you want. I look at the label. And that is a cool drawing of a fucking penguin. I love this wine. And then
I'll look at the label to know like what the varietal is, and if it's a winery that I've bought something from before that I liked.
Yeah.
And that goes a long way for me. If it's a winery that is one I've had, if I've been in their wine club in the past, or I bought their wine before and it's good, I feel like the odds of it being good are better. I'm sure that's a logical fallacy of some kind, but that's often what I do.
I do that. That's very much with beer, where like at this point I've been burned so many times with trying new beers from new breweries that I typically don't. I've collapsed a little bit in how I'm buying stuff, and it helps that I don't go to bars anymore, really. So it doesn't. I have a harder. I don't have as much of an access point to like do that.
Right.
But Jake, let's go through a little bit about what are some recommendations. How do we shop for wines? My goal with this show is to also help people kind of branch out a little bit, get some familiar vocab so they can feel more comfortable in front of a bottle of wine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reason why I thought it was worth talking about is because I think it's not that easy to buy wine in California, or at least not. One, it's expensive. It's kind of $20 a bottle entry sort of thing, especially for domestic wines. So it really feels defeating when you get a bottle you don't like. It's frustrating, and it's
defeating is a good word to use for that. Absolutely.
They took my $20.
Right.
Yeah,
and I get this.
They got me.
Yeah. Well, and it's fraught because buying wine in a grocery store, which is kind of most people's like most common interface with wine, is a really bad experience in the new world, because most of the wines you see on a grocery store shelf are made by like a small handful of mega corporations that are basically slapping they've bought up wineries and are slapping labels off of essentially these kind of mass produced kind of, I would say, soulless products. And it can be it's overwhelming because there's so many labels, which I know people are used to with beer now, but it's like there's so many labels, and then at a grocery store there's a very little chance of hitting on something compelling. So, but then on the flip side, I think people are a little intimidated to maybe walk into a wine store where they feel like they're going to have to talk to a salesperson and feel a little out of their element. However, I would recommend maybe trying to find a wine store that's local or that you feel comfortable at, because if you can explain a little bit about what your drinking preferences are to a human being, even what your beer preferences are, if you like things balanced and lower alcohol or easy drinking, and just actually have somebody try to select some bottles for you that you can get exposed to producers you like, because then once you find producers you like, then what you guys are saying, it's great to kind of latch on to a few producers. But I would recommend branching out into certainly European, wines outside of California, and then also finding smaller producers. But I think that the wine shop actually serves a pretty important purpose. And also, you're going to almost invariably, I find you're paying the same amount or less for much more compelling wines when they're curated by a wine shop than in a Whole Foods even, or like any of these places where you're.
No, I agree completely.
Yeah, I mean, at least just on the beer side, and I'm sure it's on the wine side too, where there's a lot of infighting in the distribution and whatever kickbacks the store manager gets for placing things certain places or whatever. So yeah, I would agree. Is there a price point that we shouldn't go below? Like,
it's a good. I mean, it's tough. And right now with the wine industry being what it is in California, it's like, I am trying to drink more California wine, and the tariffs are honestly going to change things too, because I'm guilty of buying a lot of European wine. So I don't know.
Guilty. We're going to turn him in, folks. He's from MS-13.
Not everybody knows this, but I mean, the EU subsidizes grape growing. So that's part of the reason why generally price to quality is much better on European wines, or can outcompete California much better. So yeah, tariffs aside, it's, seeking out relatively inexpensive Beaujolais, if you like lighter drinking reds or things like this, can be great price to quality. And for those like European wines, I'll buy even in the like $15 to $20 range, and for kind of like my main arsenal of wines that I'm drinking through, and do very, very well. For California, you're kind of at 23, 24 and above, 24 to 30 to get a really solid bottle from like a really nice producer. I'm, to speak to Bedrock, our like base level wine that we make the most of, which is like our old vine Zin is what we call it. And that's 23 or 24 on the shelf. And we're trying to hit that kind of like great price to quality table wine. And that's kind of, to me, that's kind of the low end for California of what you can get, something like really honestly made wine. So
that's fair. That's a fair price. Yeah, for sure.
It's tough. Yeah, it's tough to go. I find it's tough to go that far below that for domestic wine.
Scan the bottom shelf and find the one that's $4 off because they're trying to clear it out, and that's probably a good bet.
But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, most things on the shelf domestic under that are going to be made by Treasury or Constellation or Gallo or the wine group, and like that's fine. But I think kind of the joy of wine, or what's interesting about wine, comes from kind of the artisanal side of it. I mean, I guess I'm just not personally attracted to most of the wine industry, which is funny. Like, I love what we do at Bedrock. I love like kind of, we have a circle of, I think, very soulful producers and people that we love, but generally the stuffiness or pomp and circumstance, or like going to a tasting room in Napa, basically has no appeal to me at all.
Yeah.
Same,
and
dude.
it never did. So I was really searching out like, okay, I got this degree. I find this really interesting, but I don't find most producers interesting, if that makes sense.
Right.
I don't find the culture of California wine. I find European wine culture very interesting and romantic, but New World wine culture I find really not.
I think, you know what, I agree with you, and I think it can come down to like it's basically wine for farmers or wine for store shelves. And I think that's the differentiator. And I think you guys, and especially where you worked before, like at Ridge.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a lot of places in the, Napa, Sonoma Valley area who are like this, but they're farmers. I mean, essentially that's what you are. You're friggin' farming. Yeah. And
you used to work at Ridge back in the day?
Yes. Yeah. That was.
I have a funny story when we're done with the show to talk to you about.
Yes.
But great. But I think that's maybe the differentiator is that you guys are focused on how to handle, again, the approach of the handling the grapes from the specific lot, and going, okay, how do we manipulate this to bring out the essence of the thing, rather than saying, well, how do we make it consistent?
Right.
Which I think is what, I don't know. And I think in beer you can do both, You want to make it, you want to make your flagships consistent, but you want to also have the freedom to kind of move around the cabin a little bit.
Yeah. And there's, people from all over the country listening to us here. Hopefully somebody's listening to us, but we have to acknowledge that we're very spoiled here in California, and that I can go down
Oh yeah.
a winery, and Livermore is one of the, oldest wine growing regions, in the state, if not the oldest. And I can go down and find someone that makes really good dry Italian style reds that I love, and they win awards in there's a place called Cuda Ridge here that is, my favorite local winery here. And
Nice.
they win awards in the San Francisco wine competitions all the time. And they focus on what they do well. And it's nice, dry Italian style wines, and it's, really good stuff. And some, I would rather just go down there and buy something from them than going to the grocery store and trying to sift through what is good or not. Although most of the local grocery stores here will have a local wine section that you can, forage through and sometimes find some gems for not too much. But
yeah, especially if you don't have a wine store in your area. But in the Bay Area, if you're looking to do that, I would recommend going into Berkeley and going to Kermit Lynch.
Yeah. Okay.
And so my wife and I are in a couple wine lists. One of them is Kermit Lynch, and for like $50 a month, they send you 2 bottles of wine from, basically they're usually European wines. Some of the best wines I've ever had. And, you average out the bottle of like, okay, maybe it's $25 a bottle, but some are 18 and some are more, and it doesn't matter. It's $50, shipping included. And I would recommend doing that if you want to investigate also. But if you want to check out what's going on at Bedrock, you go to bedrockwineco.com, and they don't have a traditional like wine club where you have to sign up and then you pay $75 a year, whatever it is, right? Some of the kind of bougie, the shishi wineries in Napa will make you do, hoops, but basically there's a button in the top left that says join mailing list. And then you just sign up and they go, okay, well, whenever there's a release, we'll email you. And then when you buy some wine, then you're on the mailing list. That's how easy it is. I kind of like that. And you get the list, and it's like a flat rate shipping, and there's fantastic wines there. So definitely go Bedrock Wine Co. Check it out, because it is, drinking wine in California, it is one of the more unique wineries that I've had the pleasure of drinking a lot of bottles from. And it's not just because Jake is within knife throwing distance of me, but it's even when he was working at Bridge, it's like, damn, this is good. This is good wine. And it's nice to be able to talk about, stuff like this, especially in the Bay Area for breweries.
Yep.
We are losing a lot of, breweries, especially breweries who, like Rare Barrel, right? Like the Rare Bear, where they were focused on how to tweak the yeast and how to tweak all that stuff to bring out the flavors or whatever. It's not easy to find breweries that do that. And maybe because you can't, for the most part, with a lot of beer, because like we were saying before, it's kind of, you're taking all this like terroir and all this quality product, and by definition, you mix it up. And then what's left is then you can maybe tweak it out with yeast and fermentation temperatures and stuff like that. So there's stuff to do, but for the most part, it's just a very different animal.
Well, And when the idea of this whole show came up, and JP comes to us and says, well, hey, my brother-in-law works at a winery, and we're just going to talk about wine on the show. I didn't know what we were coming into, honestly. And these 2 bottles of wine that on my shelf, I've never seen them before in my life. But okay, it could be good, could be very bad. But we're just going to drink it and see what we got. But I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised, especially with the Evangelo. I would buy a case.
These are both really great wines, and I recommend our listeners to go to the
other one to sit down for a few years. But they're both very good in their own way, and very unique and flavorful, bold wines that you can tell have a craft touch to them. Like, we keep equating this with the craft. I'm not gonna, buy as many beers at Bevmo as I will from a craft beer store that has a curated list. I know that the owner knows what he's doing, cares for the beer, stores them well instead of on a shelf getting dusty, and moves good stuff through and recommends things to me that I want to taste. So, there's a lot of similarity in what we're talking about from the wine world and the beer world. And I've just appreciated the conversation. It's been kind of fun.
Definitely. And I just, we talked a little bit about how to get to learn wine and supporting your local wine store. Most of the country, there's going to be a good wine store somewhere around you. Find out where that is. And they usually will have a tasting on like a Saturday afternoon or something. love themed tastings, go and chat with them. And generally people at places like that are real nice. They're wanting to educate you. Just go try it out. Go learn some things on your palate. Learn some things about wine, and I think that's a good thing to try.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that really quickly. I think wine can be really overwhelming and confounding of like, what am I tasting? And the best way to learn about wine is to have, if you want to learn about Syrah, find a place that you can do a tasting and have 12 Syrahs next to each other.
Yes.
You need contrast to learn about wine. Having one glass at a time over, separated by days, it's really hard to learn. But if you can have a bunch together, you can actually start drawing those differences that make it all quite interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. And before we let you go, Jake, I do want to talk real quick or give a shout out to your sherry project. You want to talk a little bit about that real fast for those sherry lovers out there?
Yeah, I'm sure for all the many sherry lovers listening. Yeah, I got into sherry really young. It was the first wine style I really got into, mainly because most classic wine styles are really unattainable from a price standpoint. This was in college, so but to try kind of the benchmark examples is very expensive. But sherry, even still, you can try kind of some of the great benchmark sherries of the world on basically any budget. So I got really into it in school. There's kind of a history of sherry making at UC Davis. So then I think Morgan and Chris, my bosses at Bedrock, were kind of amused by my love for sherry when I started at Bedrock. And what's really interesting is in all of these old vine field blends, there's normally some interplanted Palomino grape. And Palomino is the grape used to make sherry in the Jerez region of Spain, the home of sherry. And so at Evangelo, actually, there's a few hundred Palomino vines interplanted. So I started picking those out myself and making traditional Fino style sherry with them. So that would be a totally cool. dry fortified wine aged under flor yeast. So it spends its whole life under a veil of Saccharomyces. And yeah, trying to make the most authentic sherry I can. So
wow,
that's my own project. That's called a Solares del Pacifico, as opposed to Atlantico of Spain. So
there you go, man. Yeah, you can go to that website, solaresdelpacifico.com, and you can sign up. And if you want to, I've only tried, I've had cooking sherry, you know what I mean? And then I had Jake's sherry. Like, this is a whole, if you think you know what sherry is, this is a whole different thing, man. It is like finding a new species.
It's an beverage.
It really is.
If you like flavor, it's got a lot of flavor.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, cool. For those of you who want to send in your beer or wine, see, I've been saying for years, if you send in your wine, we will judge it. But now, or we can get somebody who knows. But now we can just do it. We just had a whole show about wine. We're basically wine experts.
Yeah.
Are you going to take the sommelier exam at all? Can you do that shit where where you go, oh, you nail like the region and the fucking winery? You're like, oh, this is, Cuvée de, Bradley from the south side facing north side wind protection shear.
So, well, to the first question, no. I mean, basically, ultimately, sommelier is a customer service job, which I have no interest in.
Okay.
And so that's part of it. Yeah. We get to practice that kind of stuff as far as wine identification at Bedrock. So Morgan, the owner of Bedrock, is a master of wine. So that's a British certification, but an international certification that doesn't have to do with like pouring and serving wine.
Okay.
It has to do with more the academic pursuit. A lot of people in like wine importing are masters of wine. But yes, that test that he had to pass is all about what's the region, what's the variety, so yes, we get to do those tastings all the time where it'll be like a totally blind tasting of like 3 reds and 3 whites and 3 reds, and there'll just be questions of like, first, what region is this, what are the varieties, what are the sub AVAs, and then sometimes what are the producers.
See, I saw that documentary Somm. Right. I'm sure you've seen it, obviously. I feel like it's just watching David Copperfield. Yeah. I feel like it's all just illusion and sleight of hand. Like, there's no way.
No, you can though. I mean, you definitely, even there are some regions that are easier than others and some that are very challenging to identify, but it's kind of a process of elimination. You start with like the color, like kind of broad generalizations of, is this old world or new world? And then what's the acidity? What's like all these things and kind of, but then you need the academic knowledge of like, what is this? Does this region have residual sugar? Does this region have oxidation in the wines? Like, so you need kind of this academic side to then and then you can narrow it down. And it's not magic. It is possible. I feel like wine gets a bad that it's all kind of like this pretentious showmanship, and it is, to be fair. But you can really do it.
Process of elimination. You can get there and train us how to do that. Okay.
By the way, thank you for correcting from I can do that to people can do that.
Yeah.
You're like, you can do that, Jason. Well, people can do it. You necessarily can't, but that's fine.
Yeah, I think I'd rather be a master of wine than a sommelier. It just sounds better, you know.
Yeah, I don't want to. No. I don't want to have to learn how to pour wine properly.
Yeah, we just get the swirly straws. We're good, man. But if you want to get your fermented beverage on the show, email Brian at thebrewingnetwork.com. You'll get on the list. He'll send you the form. We do have some homebrews waiting. I need to distribute it to you guys. And we're going to have a whole show about, I think, judging them. I forget what it's about. There's some thing.
It's the Y2K brew competition that we've been talking about for years now. The Y2K challenge. We're judging beers to the 1999 Beer Judge Guidelines. We're having some beers brewed by experienced brewers who know the styles as they existed decades ago. And we're going to taste some old school styles.
Hell yeah. You know what we say on this show all the time, constantly, MAGA, right? It's just, let's go back to the old school. Absolutely, man. Let's delineate.
There was no such thing as a hazy IPA in 1999. If it was too hazy, it just got dumped out and they'd say next.
Folks, there's two kinds of beers, right? There's ales and lagers, and they're all clear. They should all be clear, folks. Anyway, Brian at brewingnetwork.com. Thank you very much, Jake. I appreciate you, man, for coming in and making you work on a Saturday, for God's sakes.
Thank you, guys. It was lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the wine too, man. We're gonna put one up each nostril and run around the park.
I think you've reached if you think you've reached the wrong station and you've dialed the wrong number, please hang up and dial again and press fast forward to the next episode, and we'll be back on beer. But thank you for hanging with us on this. It was fun.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, thanks, boys. I appreciate it. Thanks to your significant others and your families for allowing you guys to break away on a Saturday. I appreciate that a lot. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening very much. And until next time, we will see you later.